Anyway, I am not going to repeat what is there in the document because it is there in the public domain. And it is a lengthy document to be read, and it also needs to comprehend what exactly this document entails too. At the same time, what actually the takeaway for the education is, especially the teacher, the stakeholders who are involved in the directly involved in the process of teaching and learning. Therefore, my set of descriptions may not be related to what the document says, because I have a different take on this. Because what constitute curricula, where one has to locate it, what actually curricula does for the so-called learners, and what are the processes involved in it, are much more nuanced than how we define what is curricula. At the same time, what exactly in this document called the National Curriculum Framework, because behind this text, there is a logic. And the logic is sometimes explicitly dealt with in terms of the methodological framework. One may follow it as far as the drafters of this policy is concerned. At the same time, there are certain other factors, hidden factors also involved, because no way curriculum is in isolation to the ideology, especially on the political regimes. Therefore, whenever the political regime changes, whose wishes are there very much in the policy documents, and the intentions are also sometimes very much there in their descriptions. Therefore, in the description also I found there are problems. So therefore, to my mind, I would be taking very critical to this document. This is one of the first apologies to begin with. To my mind, it is not merely just a regulatory bodies trying to tell us about what to be taught, or how to be taught, or what content to be taught, because a lot of discussions there in the document. And this elaborate discussion in the document would tell us that those who framed this document also wanted to do something to the mind of the public at large, what the government of the day or the policy makers thinking about the future of education. I don't think whether it is a democratic process or not, because this lengthy document would itself say that we should be conceiving most of these ideas, no matter whether we respond it or not, whether we may critique it or not. This lengthy document would itself show that something is to be rolled out in the future of education. Therefore, I would take it this curricular framework, this draft 600-page running, is a serious document. We should not be undermining it. I would take it very seriously, because what Sri Kumar said, that for the first time this lengthy document was open to the public to discuss it. I don't know how many people would read it, how many would comprehend it, how many would understand this, and how it is different from the rest of the curricular framework. The last curricular framework is a much more concern in our times. That's why I thought I'll be taking it much more critically to this. See, the curriculum, it is always said that it is a document, it guides the teachers. Conventionally, it always, so it's orienting or preparing teachers to conduct the act of teaching and make the teaching process more effective, so that the learning outcome can be more positive and succeed. Right? This is very interesting argument, that giving total responsibility to the teacher, and the teacher takes the responsibility to impart something, valid knowledge to the students. Therefore, when you look at what Professor Ramachandran was just talking about, the wide arena that the policy entails. For instance, it is list out certain themes and it has added 2-3 more. And at the end of the day, it also talks about interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. I don't know whether it is, maybe it is very consciously doing some kind of an exercise to understand that the society is very complex. Therefore, an interdisciplinary approach to education may be useful and meaningful, but we don't know what extent this document understood, or this document would tell us that the complexity involved in this process of interdisciplinarity, right? It is not for the sake of interdisciplinarity, because then the curriculum has to be interdisciplinary. It is not just an interdisciplinary theme you introduce it. The pedagogical process are to be interdisciplinary. And the students themselves are in a different context. How you look at the interdisciplinarity, so on and so forth. So therefore, the making certain sweeping statement on or making a new subject called interdisciplinarity would not tell us about how the complexity involved in our society itself, right? Therefore, some of these new ideas, what this document would tell us that there is a revolutionary approach following interdisciplinarity, for that matter, multilingual education. These are the new words which is very much there in the academic discourses, and this document also would carry some of these sensibilities. Therefore, these are some of the problematics. Perhaps the teachers also, to my mind, how teachers conceive this idea of interdisciplinarity, right? And these are some of the practical concerns which will have an impact on the teachers' learning processes and the outcomes, to my mind. A second set of issues, to my mind, is that how curriculum always wants the teachers and the teacher should be preparing themselves to make this process of teaching and learning more effective. If at all, in our times, the body of knowledge is a co-production taking place between the so-called stakeholders in the teaching and learning process. Here, for us, teachers and students, right? It is a participatory. That is the case. This the teacher-centric approach to the curricula needs to be radically redefined. This also somewhere talks about students and their role, so on and so forth. But when it talks about curricular framing, I think much more needs to be explored, how these processes can be more participatory so that the knowledge production is not one-way dynamics, right? It can be a co-production of knowledge. Certainly, it is a co-production of knowledge where the stakeholders are equal. We can learn many things from the students, and they are the great teachers. And most of the great teachers would say that their best of their students are the great teachers, right? If that is the case, some of this approach to the curriculum framework has to be much more nuanced in understanding the complexity of it. To my mind, this curriculum approach is also something to very technical aspect to the learning processes. Anyways, the existence of the curricula certainly, or the existence of the curricula for an outcome called quality of teaching and learning. To my mind, gone are the days. Now, perhaps students are exposed to a lot of information, either through their own experiences. Perhaps this document is also talking about the experiences. But what kind of experiences students undergo? Some of the experiences are not well to be informed. Some are very psychological, because there's certain psychological implications on the experiences also. Some of the self-experiences cannot be explored further. There are a lot of complication involved in the experiences itself, right? So what kind of experiences brought into the domain of education is a big challenging question. I don't think classroom is able to accommodate diverse experience of the students who come from different life world, right? So these are the challenging questions as far as the experiences of students are concerned. And what kind of experiences would brought into the classroom teaching or outside the classroom teaching to make the students make them more successful in the act of teaching and learning. Perhaps this document perhaps may not be very suggestive to my mind, because I think if at all we think about education as a participatory process in a democratic system, then we should be looking at, instead of teaching and learning, it has to be more studies, right? Studies would take the subjective conditions of the learners and the teachers, right? A teaching becomes more of a monotonous, and it always actually, thrust upon the teacher, thinking that how to make the act of teaching more effective to the students. It's become more instrumental in nature. And followed by the evaluation method, we all follow the instrumental method, right? So as a result, the technicality involved in the teaching process and the learning process reduces the teacher as an instrument, and the students also equally an instrument, where we get some quantitative outcome out of it, right? Therefore, to my mind, instead of approaching the teaching and learning, let us consider it a study where the stakeholders are equally partners in terms of both teaching and learning, because self-learning, self-teaching is very much part of our everyday life, right? So therefore, to my mind, some of these categories are maybe useful, but when to go on to the critical understanding of the categories, perhaps we need to go beyond some of these things, because students are much more faster in terms of acquiring certain information, right? They are very fast in may not be understanding it, but they know, because I am waiting to listen to someone who is very much interested in ICT, how fast things are information. So we are unable to, in a tsunami of information, much more nuanced way of looking at these information are valuable, useful, meaningful, whether it is for the purpose of education, what extent it would help us. The stockholder education is to navigate into the process of teaching and learning is a very challenging question. Therefore, some of these issues perhaps very interesting concern to me. And the last point, because I'm not taking much of the time, because I want to listen to some of the respondents and the audience to get some views about the policy document and how it is going to be effective or useful for all of us as a democratic country. We all should be discussing it. Some of the caveats to my mind, the future oriented, if at all this policy is future oriented, this also mold into something called looking at the future of higher education also, right? This policy implicitly tells about what would be the future of higher education, right? Because if at all you want to make higher education excellent, then the schooling has to be, for the foundational ideas of the schooling and the quality of the schooling are to be much more, right, advanced. Then only we can get this demography into higher education, right? And this predicament, looking at the future of higher education, may be also problematic, because we are stretching too large to an extent to that, because we are rushing to. This policy document also tells us, this rushing to what we need to catch up with the higher education, the global knowledge domain, the market economy, so on and so forth. I think it's too much stretching to something else. Perhaps it's also losing the sense of what school education mean to, right? And these are some of the inherent flaw when you read this document, how we want to rush it. Let us stay back, talk about schooling per se, right? If at all this document is meant for school education, then we should be thinking about what we can exactly be doing for the children, those who are in the school themselves, because otherwise they lose that momentum of their life right? Because if you push many things to the mind of the children, that is unexpected too. But again, I think they are also lose the charm of being a student who is studying in the school. Yeah, so the some of the anecdotes I was also looking at. For example, in the curriculum framework, there is a special box. It talks about something called the indigenous knowledge system. So how we can understand the learning process from our own tradition, how it has to be dealt with in the school, so on and so forth, is the last set of issues I was confronting with this document, is that what the tradition wants to tell us, how we dealt with the tradition or the idea of indigenous knowledge systems, may be also problematic, right? Because as far as the knowledge domains are concerned, so at the global scale, we are very advanced in understanding how human minds work, how reflections are, how the agency is critical too. I think every agency possesses certain faculties themselves, right? And depends on the contextual realities of their life, they also reflect on. They also assert, they also resist. And this quality of the agency is very much part of every human agency, right? If that is the way of looking at the new order of knowledge, how it conditions the humans, this traditional way of looking at the learning process may be problematic too, right? Because the knowledge system is advanced and human thinking is also advancing, right? So whether it takes back us to the tradition or make us to more critical too. If at all this is a critical, then this document who should set this should actually reveal to us what is that criticality involved in this process called learning from the tradition, right? Certainly tradition is not a wrong, but a particular set of narrative that comes from the tradition, a particular cultural group, particular demographic situations that are problematic because Indian society is diverse. People learn different ways. So people tend to learn different way of looking at the world differently, right? That's what the teaching and learning process is all about. If that is the case, India being a diverse society, then this particular notion of the tradition is a problematic to homogenize something called this is the way you should learn from the tradition, and this is the tradition would tell us what to be learned, how to be learned, taught. These are, I think, to my mind, in a multicultural society in India, is problematic. Therefore, I should stop it by just reiterating the fact that although this document is a very excellent document, because we know that now the experts are hired. All right, we don't know who are these experts. And the document is a very clever document. An excellent document would tell us something this government and the policymakers want to convey to the public at large. This clever intellectual exercise perhaps also gives what actually behind this text. So therefore, we should be rereading the text again and again. Thank you so much.